And joining me now is Chastity Bowick, Director of the Transgender Emergency Fund of Massachusetts. Chastity, welcome to BNC. Good evening.
Good evening, Brittany. Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. I'm looking forward to speaking to you. And so, Chastity, a Gallup poll shows 5.5% of people identify as LGBTQ plus. This change obviously could impact a number of people from all backgrounds. We're talking about all walks of life and sexes. Explain what it actually means for those who are non-binary, intersex, or non-gender conforming.
Yeah, so non-binary or gender non-conforming is people who don't identify on the general male or female spectrum. So they identify somewhere in between, and that's how they identify themselves. But with this new law in place for documentation, this could also raise the issue of safety, unwanted outness. Sometimes we don't want people to know that we are trans just for our safety and protections. So I really think that this could be very problematic, and I just urge us to get away from pronouns in general and just address us by our name. I think that would be a lot easier.
Yeah. And Chastity, you talk about the changes, for instance, for the passport could have a positive impact, but there are some concerns that people are expressing as well. Talk about how identifying as gender neutral on documents can lead to discrimination and violence among the LGBTQ community because, we know that Black transgender people are often killed and targeted at an alarming rate.
Exactly, Brittany. So trying to access a passport and having it identify as X on it is automatically going to let someone know, like, okay, this person is in what they would say is not normal. And also can inform their friends, like, oh, this person identifies this way, and this is where they live at. It's so much private information that it will be divulged on our passports by having that information on there. So again, I think it's great that you're trying to make the effort to make sure that we are being included in all different types of forms and procedures. But at the same time, you also have to think about our safety and our protections. And I just know I wouldn't want my ID to say a trans woman on it because that is going to attract a lot of unwanted attention. And I love my life.
Do you think it's going to be more so of a requirement or an option for you all to be able to choose whether or not you want that on your passport?
I don't think it's going to be an option for us because they didn't get a community census before they went on ahead and put this out there. So I think that they're not looking for our sign on for this. They're going to do whatever they feel they need to do as they have been in previous years. So it's just another example of like the Rule 1557 that the previous White House administration tried to put in place during that term to try to make it okay for insurance offices, insurance companies, and providers to discriminate against transgender and gender nonconforming people. So for me, this is just another undermined attack by the administration to undermine our livelihood and our rights.
And what are you hearing from the other folks in the transgender community about this? What are they sharing with you and your organization?
To be honest with you, it's really a cultural difference. So a lot of people of color who we serve are like, no, why do we have to have this on our passports? I don't want to be identified like this. And then I have people from other races who are like, oh, finally, I'm glad we have this. I want it to be known that I identify as X. And so it comes down to a cultural difference. And like you said earlier, Brittany, trans women of color we die or get killed at a higher rate than any other race within the transgender and gender nonconforming community. So I think that it depends on who you ask, and that also goes back to their background as well.
And what are your thoughts, Chastity, in situations where gender may be considered necessary? For example, some shelters divide people by gender. Do you believe it is safe or fair for a man who identifies as a female to be in a space specifically for women, or could these spaces put women at risk? What do you think about that?
I think by not allowing trans women in cisgendered shelters are putting us at risk because you are telling us, you don't look woman enough to stay here. You sound too manly to stay in a women's shelter. And in return, that results into us living on the streets, indulging in survival sex work, survival drug use, and putting our lives at even more risk just to get money to find our next bill or for a hotel room for the night. So I think it's very critical that we start looking at these entry points of why we have such high unemployment rates, such high housing inadequacies. I hate that word, and
Inequities.
also
I got you.
employment is because that you're trying to separate us when we just want to be included. Treat us as how we come to you. If I say I am a trans woman, treat me as such. Stop worrying about what my pronouns are, what we have between our legs, or any of that matter. Just treat me as the individual that I'm presenting in front of you. And that in return is why we have such a high homelessness rates within the trans community, is because we can't get the proper tools and resources to become sustainable. So for here, us in Massachusetts, the Transgender Emergency Fund, that's something that we're working on, is obtaining a property or a building where we can house homeless trans and gender nonconforming folks for 6 months to give them the tools and resources needed to be sustainable, which normal shelters aren't doing anyway.
Yeah, you got to put a lot of things in place to make sure that you all are safe. Well, Chastity, thank you so much. Hopefully the Biden administration is listening to you all's concerns, and we hear you, and we thank you for being here on BNC Live tonight.